and welcome to What's Sizzlin', the podcast that covers all things marketing. We have new guests each episode from companies covering all verticals. As always, I'm your host, Mitch Levinson with Creative Sizzle, and this week's guest is Eric Pfeiffer. He is our Creative Sizzle's web developer. So welcome to the show, Eric.
Hello.
The topic of today, we're going to talk about web design, web development, websites, and your online presence and foundation and stuff like that. So let's just start with Eric. So what got you into web development? Like, how did you know that you wanted to be a web developer?
Just always liked working with computers, and websites are just all over the place, and just kind of piqued my interest and enjoyed it ever since.
Yeah, and was that when you were young or how?
Yeah, when I grew up, I was always into computers, and I'd kind of work on them with my dad. So just always kind of interesting figuring out how things work and going from there.
Yeah, so your dad is into computers with you too. He does it as a hobby?
Back then, yeah, but not so much anymore.
Not so much anymore. Now he's crunching a few numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. And obviously I know a lot about you and what you like to do with computers. Not only do you like to build websites, but you actually like to build the computers themselves, the hardware. So what's the best or most fun kind of system you put together in the past, whether it's gaming or for whatever use? Tell me about the coolest computer you built.
I've only built my own personal one once when I was in college, but it was definitely a learning experience figuring out like how each component works and which ones you need and how they, which ones are compatible with each other, and to actually have a say in what your computer has in terms of components rather than just buying something off the shelf.
Yeah, well, it's definitely pretty cool. You've built a couple or a handful for us at Creative Sizzle, so we know they work, and I'm actually using one now. But so let's talk a little bit about web development or web design. We build a lot of websites. We build a couple of different kinds of websites, whether it's a simple, easy brochureware style website, and that's kind of built in WordPress, and that's our platform of choice. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and there's a lot of reasons why we like WordPress to do that. And then we have a more complex platform for more complex websites that have different layers of structured data and reasons that they're more complex. Maybe it's an e-commerce site, or maybe it's a home builder site, and it has parent, child, grandchild, great grandchild, grandparent levels of data, and WordPress doesn't handle more than 2 or 3 layers very well efficiently. So we build 2 kinds of websites, but basically our web design and development process is very similar regardless of what kind of site you're building. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you look at a website and what you need in order to get started building one?
First thing I like to do is kind of like figure out what their existing website was built on and kind of see what technologies that we might need in the future and what might work best for them.
It's rare, although we do run across it occasionally, but it's pretty rare to run across a company that doesn't have a website. They've never had a website. They're just starting up, something like that. So most of the time, we're looking at a company that has a website. It's either they're unhappy with the performance of it, or it has outlived its useful life. Let's talk about that for a second. So if you're evaluating websites, how old do you think most websites last? How old do you think a website can be and still remain effective?
I would say probably 3 to 4 years, and after that, it's kind of feeling a little dated. You might have performance issues, as you kind of build on top of your old cruft.
Yeah, and we're also finding that technology changes, every 6 months, every 12 months, every 24 months for sure. If you're working a website that's 3 to 4 years old, you're probably on its limit from a state of the art kind of, people think you're keeping up with the times related to technology. If you have a website that's 5 years old, it doesn't work on everyone's phone. It's definitely not going to work on everyone's browser. Google and the other search engines don't support that technology that it was built in. So once you start getting outside of that 3-year window, the technology just doesn't work the same as it did. 3 to 4 years is about the lifespan of a typical website. And most of our clients, after about 18 months or 2 years, they're starting to think about, okay, maybe it needs a little bit of a facelift, or I need to add something to it, or I need to upgrade, some of the components in it or plugins. But yeah, that's a good guideline. So once we do that initial review of what they currently have and where they're at now. What's really the next step?
Getting a feel of what some of their desires are and kind of expectations and what they're looking for in a new website, and so that we can deliver on their goals.
Yeah, so that's a good point. You bring up what the goals are, and a lot of what we do is based on goals, right? So how do we accomplish our goals? Everyone wants a website that drives traffic and generates sales. And I mean, obviously those are big picture goals, but in order to achieve those kinds of big picture goals, you also have to have some key performance indicators that you track towards to make sure you're going to make small changes and have small wins so you can have larger wins down the line. So I think that's a good thing to identify the goals. And, we do that in our discovery call, right? So we have that discovery call where we take what we found from an evaluation standpoint of their old stuff, what they're getting rid of or replacing, and we listen to what they're saying in terms of what their goals are and what they want their new site to do. And then we also use that to talk about design and colors and fonts and graphics and pictures and logos and stuff like that. So that's definitely a good part of the discovery call. What else? Am I missing anything that we need to talk more about from a discovery call standpoint?
I think that pretty much sums up most of what we need to know or want to know in terms of client expectations.
And then our development process splits in two, right? So you then take that information that we found from a discovery call standpoint and you take that to the web development component, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We do have our graphic design or website design process happen kind of concurrently, where they're creating mock-ups and prototypes and the layout of the homepage, and then we use the layout of the homepage to create the internal pages, and we create a handful of internal pages depending on where they're at. And then it culminates with sign off or approval of the homepage, the style of all the rest of the pages, and the design of the site. After the discovery call, while all that's going on from a design standpoint, what are you doing from a web development standpoint?
I will typically from there start to build out some of their development environment, kind of set up all of that pre-web development stuff. So whether that's setting up WordPress or Radmin, just kind of getting all that set up.
So you have the system and the hosting environment and everything like that set up, and we also use some of the notes from the discovery document to create, technical requirements so that we know exactly the functionality that's going to happen on the site, where people are going to click, what the URL structure. Talk a little bit about what would be included in a technical requirements document so that, so the people who are listening who, really don't understand technical requirements, they don't understand what use cases are and what business cases are and stuff like that. What is the purpose of a technical requirements document?
The purpose of that is to document what the website should do and in terms of user interaction, what happens when somebody clicks on a like button or fills out a contact form. Do they get a success message or they get redirected to a landing page or stuff like that? And just kind of be able to define all of those different components throughout the website.
Making sure that everyone has the same understanding and is on the same playing field as it relates to expectations for what the site's going to do, what's it going to integrate with, what the URL structure is going to be, how people are going to use the site, and what from a usability standpoint. And combine that with what we talked about in that second track, the design track. What's it going to look like, and what kind of buttons and colors and fonts and graphics we're going to use. All of that comes together and we get that approval for both of those processes approximately at the same time. And then we go into, what we would talk about from, the development cycle, where you're trying to implement, you're developing the site, you're trying to implement what the graphic designer designed as a mock-up or prototype. Talk about that for a little bit.
So what we use for prototyping is Adobe XD. So that is really beneficial for both designer and developer because I can see exactly how much space is in between certain headline versus body text, what the colors are, and I can just copy straight from that and then go right into my code from there. So it really leaves very little guesswork that I have to do. So I know exactly what the designer intended. Obviously, within the limits of Adobe XD, there, not everything is completely possible, but you get a very good understanding.
We certainly like Adobe XD because it lays it out, and you can get a website to match as closely as possible to what the designer had in their mind in terms of, like you said, spacing and layout and how it appears on the screen. And one of the challenges that we found before XD and when we worked with graphic designers before they had a prototyping model and they were just creating kind of flat files for us to look at, was that file really is dependent on the resolution of the screen. How big the screen is that you're looking at will lay it out differently. We build responsive sites. We've been doing that for a long time. And my screen shows something different than your screen, who shows something different than Julia or Lauren's screen. And they're all different than every one of our clients has a different monitor and a different screen resolution. So how every website looks on anyone's screen is unique and specific to that user, their configuration. So it's really sometimes very hard to get the site to look the same on anyone's particular screen. So using a tool like XD allows us to kind of see how it's going to work and account for some of those differences. And then, I like XD also because, when we were using those flat files, there wasn't any kind of linkability. So you couldn't really link from one page to another to sort of see what it looked like. You can, show a different page and you can show something, but a lot of times you look at something and you have an idea of what's supposed to happen or how it's supposed to look. And I have a different idea of what's supposed to happen or how it's supposed to look. And when we look at it, both of our ideas are different than the client because it's their concept, right? It's their business, it's their industry. So we want to do what they want and we want it to look good and function, as if we were their target market. And sometimes we are, but for the most part, they know what they are going to expect. And what we know is what people who go on the internet to a website expect when they see something, right? So if something's underlined, what do you expect it's going to do?
It's going to be a link.
Right. And if something is underlined in blue, even better. And that's one of the reasons we can't really use underline in regular copy. We have to use italics or bold or something else. It's a usability standpoint. It's what the expectation is. And there's, a lot of those nuances. So I definitely think that's pretty important for sure. So as you're trying to implement someone else's design and you're looking at the prototype or the design and stuff like that, what are some of the things that you like to see in those designs that make it easier for you to put together, build that website the way that it's supposed to look?
The biggest thing is consistency, because then that way I can build out base components and kind of share a lot of code in between different components, just kind of slightly tweaking them if they need to be, in certain contexts. So yeah, repeatability is definitely the biggest one. So if you have, your one card and kind of you can use that throughout the website, but just slightly tweak it, depending on if it's like a blog post card or, like a real estate listing or something like that.
We have our own language of what we talk about from a website standpoint. And, Eric just mentioned a card, and different sections of your website we call partials. It's just different areas. So if you have a card or a partial or a piece of your website, let's say it's your call to action, it's your form, and you want it to appear in the middle of a page in a certain way, if you have it laid out exactly the same way, you can reuse that partial. We can reuse that piece of code. We could reuse that form the same way throughout the site and only have to have built it once. So consistency is very important. How do we reuse components or pieces of your website throughout your website so that you're able to use them multiple times but only build them once and make it make sense for the visitor when they're seeing it, wherever they're seeing it? So that's definitely important. And I think the other point of what Eric said related to a card, and as he was related to something else, all of your different types of content, whether it's a blog post and it's a paragraph, whether it's an employee and you're talking about their profile, or whether it's a project, a portfolio item, past customers, whatever it is, as long as they're similar and consistent and you can reuse what you've done, but just put in someone else's profile or add a little bit different content, but it's exactly the same way from a layout or code standpoint, makes it a lot easier on Eric and web developers to lay it out that way. And that brings us to the difference between data, content, and we can talk about the difference between configuration and setup. So when we build a website, we need to have some amount of real data and some amount of real content. You want to talk about, how much you need in order to build the framework for the website, the kind of skeleton, so that the user can see and the client can see exactly what they're going to get?
Yeah, so I like to start out with like Lorem Ipsum text just to get some placeholder in there and just kind of so the client can kind of visualize what it's kind of going to look like. Obviously, once they start to actually populate their own content, they see a little bit better. It's nice if they have existing content we can kind of borrow from, just because in that way the client sees that their own stuff in there and just it's not really fictitious, I guess.
Yeah, so and Lorem Ipsum is like that Greek text that's just kind of placeholder text. It's almost like, we also put in areas where it requires images. We put in, squares or circles or whatever the image container is going to be of just a single color. So we can see here's where an image or a graphic is going to be. Here's where placeholder text is going to be. It's not real, but it is what it's going to look like. So you can see exactly how many characters or words you need or how big the square or area is going to be, stuff like that. So definitely important to do that. But we like to add some of that content to begin with. But we also like to have the client add some of that to begin with to end up with. Why is that?
It gives the client a little bit of an opportunity to learn how the system works and how to enter in content and be able to do it effectively and efficiently themselves in the future.
Yeah. Our philosophy is very much, if you give someone a fish, well, they'll eat for a day. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll be able to survive for their life. So what we want to do is we want to build a website that our clients can use themselves. They don't need us to maintain it for them, although we're here and available, and they certainly can pay us to do that. And we have a lot of clients that just don't want to deal with it, and we do that for them. But if they want to go in and change some paragraphs, and if they want to go in and swap out some pictures or change the images in a slide or whatever, they have the capabilities to do that. And by having them go in at the end when the site is developed to add their content, it accomplishes multiple goals for us, right? Just like you said, Eric, first, it teaches them how to use their website. We teach them, we have training sessions, and typically takes 2 1-hour sessions, and they're good to go, and teach them a little bit. They start using it, and we teach them a little bit more, and then they're pretty good at it. And certainly we're available if they don't or need help in the future after that. But it not only teaches them how to use their website and keep it maintained, the other part is it helps with bug fixing, right? So we don't know what their day-to-day job is going to be, and we don't know what they're going to update more often than not from a content or data standpoint. They do. So the first thing they go in to administer and learn is kind of what they're going to do on a regular basis. So we want to make sure that they're able to do that, and we want to make sure that what they're doing actually works for them, because even though it works for us, we may have a different business process, and we may be thinking about it a little bit differently than they do. So we want to make sure that what it does works. So we typically deploy about 20 to 30% of the content or copy for them, and we ask that they do the bulk majority, 50 to 70%, because we want to make sure that the site works, and we want to make sure that they're going to be able to use the site once we launch it. So talk a little bit about how often do we get contacted after the site launches for training, or how long does it really take for a training session? Because you do a lot of our trainings, and tell me a little bit about the last couple of training sessions you've had with some of our clients.
Training sessions typically last about an hour. They can last a little bit longer depending on how big the website is and how much functionality needs to be covered throughout the website. But we typically will, in terms of admin, it's a little bit more complex. So we kind of walk them through a little bit more detailed, since there's a lot more kind of going on. So whether that's helping them figure out how to use the home builder module in terms of a home builder website, or updating static pages, creating their own landing page, uploading media, and what the best resolution and size is so that their website doesn't slow down. In terms of WordPress, it's a little bit more simple just because I think it's a bit more straightforward, and clients tend to be a little bit more familiar with it since it's used so much over the internet.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty funny. Something that you said before made me think, when you said that, the training may take a little bit longer for the larger sites. It's funny because I knew what you meant exactly when you said that, but our listeners, they probably think a larger site is a site that has a lot of pages. And really, although it is larger, and that's true, what you meant was the sites that have more complexities to them. And so whether you have 1 page or 100 pages, to us it's the same size, because you just have to go in and add the pages. We're creating the template for the pages to be created, and how many templates do you have? That's what creates the size of the site for us, right? How many integrations do you have with third-party software? How many integrations do your form have with your MailChimp or SharpSpring or Constant Contact or HubSpot or, whatever your Salesforce, whatever your CRM tool is? How many third-party integrations do you have? That's what makes it more complex. how many areas or pieces of advanced functionality are you using? Or do you have e-commerce included in? Are we integrating with a supply catalog? That's what makes the size of the site bigger in our standpoint. Not necessarily how many pages or how many employees or how many pictures or stuff like that, although they do have a little bit of impact, but definitely kind of funny. So, I thought that was interesting. We're going to take a little break right now to let our sponsor talk a little bit. So we'll be right back. Are you having credit problems, or are you looking for someone to help you improve your credit score? Contact John Wilkinson with creditsolutionproblems.org. John is very versed and understands exactly what needs to be done in order to improve your credit score, get your credit back in line, and if you are looking to help people after the pandemic get back on track, John would be willing to work with you and your donation so that you can help those that really need it. Visit creditproblemsolved.org or call 866-850-9360. And now, let's get back to the show. We are here today talking with Eric about website design and development. And the first part of the show, we talked a lot about our process of creating websites. And, now we're going to talk a little bit about what happens now. We have the website, it's built, the client is trained, they've added all their content and their data, and they're getting ready to go. And one of the next steps is setting up search engine optimization and setting up Google Analytics and things so we can continue to look at the effectiveness of the site over time, long term. So talk a little bit about some of the things that you do from a search engine optimization standpoint just before launch and then just after launch, if any.
Before launch, I like to make sure all of the relevant structured data is set up, since that kind of helps search engines kind of understand what kind of a page it is, kind of content to expect. Is, this page a collection of blog posts, stuff like that. So it informs search engines so they can get a little bit of a context as to what the page is about. And other things like setting like breadcrumbs, not necessarily visible, but as structured data, so then search engines can kind of understand the structure of your website and kind of be able to better crawl your website.
So structured data is one of those things where Google put tools in place and ways to look at websites that help Google understand what a page is about, what a website is about, how it becomes, an expert and gets ranked in the Google search index. And structured data is one of those ways. And it's part of the algorithm that ranks sites in order. And that data is a way that, web developers put that data in such a structured way so that it's easy for Google to read and understand. And it's not anything that you would see on the front end, although it is important, and we can talk about it in a second, that you want to use proper keywords and other tactics in your actual copy and content on your website. But structured data is kind of the stuff that you put in the code for Google when you share to a social site for, whatever you're trying to reach. Tells what the description is, what the title is, who the author is maybe, and other kind of tags like that. Yeah, so that's kind of structured data. So what else besides setting up the pages so that they will take description tags and title tags and some of those other tags? What other types of SEO things do we do right around a website launch?
So I like to run it through SEMrush just to kind of see if there's any like major issues that they find, such as like duplicate H1s, on your page, or missing descriptions or missing titles or duplicates, stuff like that. Or if there's any web pages that it can't crawl, since obviously that could be a pretty big issue, because then that would mean that your page can't be indexed on Google or Bing or whatever.
So an SEMrush is one of the cool tools we use. There's lots of tools out there. We use several of them. But yeah, SEMrush, or what are some of the names of some of the other tools?
SEMrush is the big one that I know. I don't know of any other. I guess Ahrefs.
So there's SEMrush, there's SEO Moz, there's Ahrefs, there's several tools that we use. Even once the site is launched, Google Search Console, which used to be called Webmaster Tools, has some cool stuff in it. But Screaming Frog has some capabilities related to URL structure and error page codes and stuff like that. But, Eric said a couple of cool things before that I want to make sure it makes sense. Putting the right tags in place, and then the H1 tags and stuff like that. If you're a little bit unfamiliar with how they work, don't worry about that. That's what your SEO person is supposed to be. If you don't have an SEO person and you really want to learn a little bit about that, just make sure that when you go to your website and you are using WordPress or you're using whatever tool you're using, go ahead and just fill out all the fields. The description tag The description is really, that's the sales pitch. What is this page about? If I saw that paragraph or that 150 or 40 characters in a Google index and it's in a listing on a page, what can I say on that one area? What can I say in the description that will get someone to click on my link over everyone else's? So that's what the description tag is and things like that. And that's very important. Even though the keyword tags are not used or indexed by the search engines anymore, and they haven't been for a long time, they're still important to use, and we use them for editorial content. So we know what the focus of the page is supposed to be. Are those keywords used in the description, in the page title, in the content and copy on the site? What is the page about for us? And if we see that is effective, Google will then see that as being effective. So all that's really important. So using tools to figure out what works and what doesn't, what pages are effective and which ones have duplicate tags, and where the errors are, what cautionary things you have to change and update, that's definitely important. So what else is there about setting up an SEO site?
Recently, Google's started introducing Core Web Vitals. So they're going to start to use that to determine page ranking. So that kind of defines how good your website or pages are for user experience, because they're really trying to make sure websites aren't slow or, shift content when images load in because they don't, specify width or height, and just kind of making sure that, content above the fold is loading as fast as possible for the best user experience, because in that way, users are more likely to stay there and have a better experience.
The more traffic you get to your site, the more people link to your site and stay there and look at more pages, the more Google thinks your site is providing good primary content, the better your rankings are going to be. And it's all about user experience. So Google tries to give a one-to-one marketing experience for all of their users. That's why they've been working on semantic search. That's why they monitor user behavior. There's a lot of political topics that we can talk about, whether that's good and bad. But from a true marketing standpoint, it is absolutely good that Google can serve you results that match your preferences or tendencies. And it gets the knowledge of that based on your user behavior. So it's very cool stuff. So I like that a lot. And incidentally, that's really one of the reasons why you have to continue to do SEO after launch. It's not just what you do to launch a site. It's what happens not only when you launch the site, but also after. So, and Eric, we're going to get into what happens after launch and some of those additional services, but tell me a little bit about just the web development launch process. Some people say, oh, it's simple. You just change some values, right? And it is, right? Technically, it is. So tell me a little bit about the launch process.
The launch process can vary. WordPress is fairly easy since there's a lot of plugins such as Duplicator that you can basically zip it up and upload it and basically rerun an installer, and it's pretty much good to go since it replaces all of the development URLs with the production ones. But in terms of Radmin, it's a bit more complex just because it's a lot more data. So a lot of times what I'll start out with is creating the account on our production server, uploading all of the files and getting all the database set up. And once I've done all that, then I kind of change my local settings so I can browse it locally without exposing it publicly yet, just so I can verify everything's set up and working properly and do any last minute tweaks that need to be done just for production, such as setting up Google Analytics and stuff like that. Since that doesn't really apply to development so much, so once I've confirmed everything's kind of working, then I can switch over the DNS records to point to the production website. And then after about a few hours to a day, it pretty much varies. So then after that DNS is switched over, then I can start to issue Ssl Certificate so that the website's secure. Then after that, pretty much good to go.
You just said a lot of technical ease right there. And literally you just described 1 to 2 days worth of activities. And I think for our audience, two of the things that are important that you said that I want to make sure I make clear, we manage good web development companies, not just us, but good web development companies have 2 sites for your website. One is on a production server, which is live and what people see when they go to www.whateveryourcompanyis.com. And one is a development server. And the development server is where you would apply changes and updates to the website. So we build the initial website on a dev server, and then we move it to the production server so that we make sure that it works. And because every server is different, that's why you need to do some tweaks. But remember, if you're not using us and you're using a different company to build a website for you, make sure that they're managing production server and a development server, because if you ever need to make an update or a change, if it breaks something on your website, You want it to be broken on a dev server so people don't see it. And you don't want it to be broken on a live server for everyone to see. So make sure you do that. And the second thing is, the SSL certificate is really important also because Google indexes secure content and secure websites higher than unsecured. So you definitely want to make sure that you're doing that in addition. And we're talking about web servers and production servers, development servers, SSL certificates. We have a lot of companies that are large and big companies, and they build big websites, and of course we're hosting them, or they're hosting them, and they're set up in a self-hosted environment. There are also a lot of smaller businesses that use websites like Wix or Squarespace and stuff like that. It's not exactly web development. It's really more like web configuration and picking a theme. One of the challenges with those sites is the capabilities of doing search engine optimization. You can only do so much because you're built in a framework around it. So people say, I love my site. It was easy to set up. It's great as a destination. But if you want people to drive by, if you want people to get there by themselves, you really need to do something a little bit different. So if you're using those sites, great, no problem. They're easy to use, they're inexpensive, but make sure that you have the right mindset and expectation related to what you're going to be able to do over time and long term in terms of traffic. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. We talked a lot about SEO and launching a website, and we haven't really talked about tracking and Google Analytics, and we mentioned in the very beginning goals and achieving your goals and tracking those key performance indicators to make sure that you're achieving them, you're getting those small wins. So right before you launch is when we put in Google Analytics. So tell me a little bit about setting up Google Analytics and the event track on a website.
Yeah, we start by installing like Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, something that kind of informs us when users convert, such as filling out a contact form or getting directions to your store or building or whatever type of location that you want them to get to, calling you, stuff like that. So then that basically helps to be able to understand like how effective your website is and like getting leads. And
so how effective your website is at driving traffic to your website, where you are in the search engines and how you rank, how many people come to your website and either fill out the form or click on a phone number, or if you're a physical location, click on the map driving directions to get to your location. What kind of calls to action do they take on your website? First, are you getting traffic? And if you are getting traffic, is that traffic quality traffic? Are they taking action that will then eventually result in a sale? So that's really important. So, we offer ongoing services to keep you effective, right? Looking at the tracking report on a regular basis to kind of help you tweak your content over the time to make sure that you're doing it the right way to get more people to click. Looking at your SEO on a regular basis to make sure that you're getting the traffic you need or writing the content you need or having the blog posts that you need, stuff like that. And that's why we use the websites that we use, Radmin and WordPress, because they're really easy to keep updated, and with fresh and reliable content you can use those sites to keep that traffic coming to you. So Eric, thank you very much for being a guest on the show. We really appreciate it. It was definitely great information.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining us this week for another episode of What's Sizzling in Marketing. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you're getting this podcast from to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It really does help out the show. As always, if you'd like more information about today's guest, becoming a guest yourself, or if you need marketing support, it can be found at creativesizzle.com/what's sizzling. Thanks again. I'm Mitch Levinson, and we'll see you next time.